Coaches and most helping professions are taught to be good listeners. We're taught that listening is a valuable skill that we need to acquire in order for us to really support other people. And it's true. Things like active listening, where we're really being present with another person, where we're empathizing, where we're even using mirroring and paraphrasing for people to get a sense of being heard. These are really valuable skill sets that we pick up along the way and that help us to really work with our clients. The thing is that there's more to it. There's a deeper level of listening that can actually happen, one that is deeply transformative for people. But actually, this form of listening is not particularly well known, and it's a bit of a skill to find your way into it. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about this level of listening, which is connected to kind of depth of being and a subtle field of awareness that we can connect with when we're actually listening from this place within ourselves and into that place with another. Welcome to the Deep Coach channel. I'm Leon VanderPol. I'm the founder of the Center for Transformational Coaching. And on this channel, we like to talk about all things related to that grand and magnificent journey of human awakening and transformation. Thanks for joining us again. In this video, I want to talk about deep listening, particularly in some ways that you may not have conceived of before, where we really access subtle fields of awareness. Now, earlier I was mentioning active listening, and there are some general components to this that are involved in all forms of good listening, even deep listening. And one of those is the degree of presence that we bring to a context. One of the confusions I've noticed in working with students of deep coaching is that they often believe that just by showing up, they're being present. Like, I am here and I'm listening and therefore I am being present. But that's actually a very surface level depth of presence. There are deeper degrees of presence that we can bring to a conversation and a situation. For example, if we are just simply sitting with another person in a conversation and we're engaged and we're talking and we're listening and we're mirroring, we are indeed present. But a depth of presence that invokes in another person a willingness to go into deeper parts of themselves, to begin to reveal the vulnerable, the shadowy, the sticky, the painful. That depth of presence is something altogether different. It's something that you exude. And it's got to do with a degree of spaciousness that you bring through a quality of being. So the way that you're being with another person, that quality of presence, that spaciousness, there's something in that that not only allows you to listen differently, because you're taking in a greater degree of sensory perception, not only in the person, but in the world around you. You're taking in more in that spaciousness. The other person also begins to feel better heard and held in that spaciousness. And as a person feels heard and held, safety comes in. They feel safe with you, they feel trusting with you. And in that, then, they will touch parts of themselves that they may not otherwise reveal to anyone else. And this is when things can really go deep. So just understanding the depth of presence that you bring and the spaciousness of your being. That's a quality that you can cultivate in yourself, just as you generally go about life learning to slow things down. And as you slow things down, you begin, as I said, to take in more information from the world around you. Not necessarily that you're interpreting it all, but simply that it's there within the field of your awareness that you can then use to inform how you engage or how you respond or inquire into another person's life. Then there is a big question about what it is that we're actually listening for. So most conversations and most coaching conversations, they're listening at the level of the story. Let's call it the situation level, like what's going on. And very often in that, there's going to be, the drama of the situation. He said this and she said that, then this happened, then that happened. And that led me to feel a certain way or to act in a certain way. This is the nature of conversation. It's the nature of coaching. And don't forget, people often come to coaching when they want to rectify something in their life, when they want to make change, when they want to grow in meaningful ways. And often the challenges of our life are brought to the table because those are an easy entry point for really working with ourselves and growing in some way, to move through the challenges of our life and to learn the lessons we're here to actually learn through those challenges. So people coming in with this, and very often then coaches themselves get kind of trapped at that level where they're listening to the story, and then the mind wants to help that person resolve things, maybe find a solution or a creative way forward. But the mind begins thinking, the intellect gets more involved, and they become a kind of thinking partner to help people move through the story. And that often then brings them into a space of, well, what actions do you want to take and how do you want to implement those actions in your life? Kind of thinking. But when we only listen at the level of the story and then get caught up in a kind of solution-oriented, results-focused kind of mindset, we're not actually able to listen at a deeper level. There's something that we can be doing in those contexts in which we are going to open up to a greater level of information. And I'm going to call that level the psychological level. So think of it this way: as human beings, we are indeed meaning-making machines. We spend every minute of our waking day kind of making meaning of the world around us. So you can think of it this way: things are happening outside of us. It's energy moving that creates a kind of stimulus that we take in through our senses. And then through the filters of our belief systems and our value systems, we make meaning of that information. And then we act in some way. Maybe we judge the information to be good and we feel good, or we act in positive ways. Something happens that we say, well, that's not good, that's negative, that's wrong, that's out of place, that shouldn't be happening. Then we may feel not as good and we begin acting in ways maybe to rectify that, whatever it may be. In any case, we have to understand the depth of meaning making that we're constantly making. And this is happening within the human mind. This is where the psychological level of listening can be so incredibly valuable, is that you don't just want to come in at the level of the story. You want to use the story as a doorway to a deeper level of understanding of how the mind makes meaning in that person. And then from that meaning, we begin to understand why they act the way they do, why they feel the way they do, and very much why they experience life the way they experience life. And that's a really big piece, because you have to understand that most human beings are on a kind of autopilot from a young age, conditioned with belief and value systems born of their cultural systems and their family systems that are really imprinted upon the developing child for years upon years upon years, until that child lives through those habitually. They don't even see those imprints of culture, of belief and value, mindsets, attitudes, and they just live through it. So here now they come into a session and there's an opportunity for them to begin to perceive that, but they may not necessarily perceive it. This is the work of the coach, is to begin to listen beyond just the story and the need to resolve it or fix it, but for the deeper structures of mind that are at play, the psychological level. In other words, how a person is making meaning of the world. And that informs them and why they feel the way they do, why they act the way they do, why they experience life the very way that they experience life. And this is immensely valuable information to be working with. And it takes you kind of from the story, using it as a doorway to seeing patterns of operation in the world. And we begin to see what I call the coding of the mind, the inner operating system, the way that our mind has been coded to make meaning of the world and therefore to behave and act and feel within the world. And revealing that within a coaching session is a level of depth that a person can get to with you. The psychological level can also include information that comes from the emotional body and from the energetic body. So when you're listening in that way to a person at a psychological level, likely too, you're going to be picking up emotions that are coming out. Now, you're not just picking up the emotions just to say, oh, that's sad, or that's happy, or that's joyful, or that's irritated. Those are good pieces of information that we can pick up relatively easily. The bigger task of being with emotion that arises through a psychological exploration of their inner operating system and their life experience is the capacity to be with emotion, particularly negative emotion, because those emotions can be heavy and hard and they can kind of come at you in a coaching context. And if a coach is not careful and they're not aware of their ability aware of their capacity to kind of be with another person's pain, they will do things to shut it down as an expression. Perhaps they'll ask a question that puts the person back into their intellect, or they'll move the conversation into how do we fix this kind of question, rather than just being with the emotion and being with the energy in whatever form it takes. Because emotion and energy is another way of us accessing the deeper realm of the psychological. In other words, kind of what within us is giving rise to these experiences of emotion and energy that we carry. If we're feeling frustrated or down constantly, there's going to be something that gives rise to that, often in the way, again, that we interpret the world, the way that we perceive ourselves and perceive the events of the world and perceive how things are happening to us, or even perceiving how we affect things. All of that makes a difference in terms of our overall life experience. So just to kind of come back in summary, your quality of presence matters immensely. Just the way that you're being with another person. Are you relaxed? Are you open? Are you receptive? And are you really there? And from that, then, as you listen, you're listening not only to the story and what's happening at that level, and kind of getting into their life and becoming really empathetic or empathic, the ability to relate to another person's story, kind of entering in there, you're being in that space. But beyond that, even as you do that, you want to listen for the psychological level and how the mind is making meaning. And then if you start to mirror some of that back, gently, easily, through paraphrasing or just like directly naming it, like I hear this, or I see that belief at play, or it sounds like this might be going on, or here's a couple of dots that are worth connecting just to see if there's something there that we might actually look at, that helps to reveal to that person how their inner operating system is functioning. And this is a great gift in the coaching relationship, for a person to see with clarity how their inner operating system is judging, and just to put a kind of cherry on the cake, to do this without any kind of judgment, to do it without any kind of judgment. That ability to just sort of step back and become observational about the way that we have constructed our interior reality and thereby kind of created our life experience, to be objective about that is really key. Because people will, and you probably experience this, kind of beat themselves up once they begin to see what's really going on. They can take a negative view of themselves. They can feel guilty and at times shameful for having thought a certain way or lived a certain way, and have had to have the experiences that they've had to have to kind of learn about that. So we really want to hold all of that with great regard, great respect, great honor and dignity. And this is again where this idea of our presence comes in. Because when we are truly present to it all, just being with it, allowing it to arise in the field of our awareness, that's where things start to make sense for people. And that's where they really begin to acknowledge the truth about what's going on within themselves. And now we're getting into the deeper stuff. Now we're getting into that level where transformation of the mind can really begin to happen. And that's not just the same as saying I change a behavior here or I change a behavior there. It's not just saying I do things differently in the world, I act differently towards this person, or I communicate differently in that context. It's a transformation of our inner reality, where we begin to perceive a possibility that has lied far beyond what we may have ever understood is possible before. And that becomes possible when we loosen the grip of old ways of thinking, those conditioned patterns that have been kind of imbued into us from a very, very young age, and that we've lived through habitually. When those become clear, when we begin to perceive the operational reality of those, and they're held with great care and great regard, now the transformational journey can begin, because people will want to start to let go of certain aspects of that and to, in a sense, heal themselves from patterns of thought and operation that simply no longer serve who they feel that they're becoming in this world. Not just what they're doing, but who they're becoming as a human being. So there's one more aspect to this that I want to talk about that's also really vital, and that has to do with ways of being. There's a way of listening to another person that the author Otto Scharmer has called generative listening. I love this term. So generative listening is a very deep level of listening that even drops below empathetic listening. So again, empathetic listening is that ability to listen to a person and be in their life, to be able to say, I get where you're coming from and I understand what's going on. And for that person to be heard and felt in that as well, because through your words, through your mirroring and paraphrasing and questions, people are definitely getting a sense that they are heard within that level. Most coaching happens at the empathetic level. But we can drop even deeper into that, into the generative level. And the generative level is effectively learning to listen from a depth of being in myself into the depth of being in another. In fact, Otto Scharmer says it's listening from my source, my deepest sense of source, into your deepest source. So the idea of listening from being into being. Now, if you've never worked with being level awareness in coaching or in your own life, this may be new for you. And conceptually, you may grasp it. Experientially, it may still take some time for you to get there as you kind of begin to think about this and practice it in your work. But being level awareness is where this starts. And as I've talked about in other videos, the great transformational question is, who do you choose to be in this situation or in life? Who do you choose to be? Not what are you doing different or how are you thinking different, but how are you being different? And that requires people to go in and begin to really listen to their interior reality. What's alive within them at a being level? And that's hard at first because the first things they often encounter is things like my emotional level or my energetic level. But we're dropping below even that into a core depth of who we are. You could say right into the essence of who we are as human beings. And this is really where transformational coaching as an approach takes root. We're concerned with who a person is being in this world and how they express that being. In other words, how they show up in the various situations of their lives. It's related to presence, but it's very much related to this energetic quality that is you at a core level. So if you've never known yourself at an essential level of being, if you've never kind of traversed that ground within yourself, it will be hard for you to listen for that same ground of being in another human being. Yeah. Once you begin to explore this for yourself, then, and you begin to get a sense of what that feels like and is experienced like within yourself to be in a state of being awareness, which really is an ontological approach, because in an ontology, we're concerned with this idea of being and who are becoming at that level. So once you start to learn through practice with yourself, you can start to listen from that source of being into another person's source of being, below the energy, below the story, below the emotions, what is going on there. And what you'll also be able to do is listen for whether that person themselves is tapped in, is attuned to their own depth of being. Are they even cognizant of that place within themselves? I worked with many, many people for whom this is so new. They've never learned to listen to themselves in that way. They've never sat with themselves in the quietude of their inner space and listened at a core level to who they are. Now, in transformational work, we often start with the question, who do you choose to be in life in this situation? So let's say there's a conflicting situation that's happening between a couple and the fights continue, the arguments continue. Someone comes to you and says, this is just not working for me. I don't want to be this person who keeps showing up, getting triggered by every little thing that's happening. So on a psychological level, we really can begin to listen to what may be giving rise to that experience. What is it within them that is being triggered? Often a value that the other person, for example, has not upheld. Something of this nature, right? Or some aspect of themselves that they hold in low esteem has been kind of poked, and they feel the rising of that sense of unworthiness that can trigger certain behaviors as well. So we're listening on that level, yes. But there is the question then, who do you choose to be in this situation? And let's say the person says, well, I just want to be a far more peaceful, calm person. I want to be grounded in myself, kind of connected to a deeper wisdom, not easily triggered by what this other person is saying. Okay, peace, calm. So not just in the moment of that conversation are you listening, saying, are you peaceful or calm now? But what is it to be peace and calm? What is it to be the living embodiment of peace and calm in the world, in your life? And that's what makes the journey transformational, because we have to start looking at everything that stands in the way of being the living embodiment of peace and calm. But for that person to begin to experience that depth within themselves, like they are connected to that place within themselves that is peace. And this is different from trying to be peaceful. This is connecting to that place of being within themselves in which peace abides. It is a lived reality within themselves. And they are connecting in your presence as a coach, who themselves is connected to their own depth of being, to that which is peace, to that place within themselves in which peace abides. And as they experience that connection to that place within themselves in your presence, because you're evoking it through the quality of your being and the way that you're listening for that depth within them, that becomes more prominent. It becomes it's like you evoke it within them. And there's a sense of awareness and almost at times a sense of full embodiment of that existential reality. They begin to feel the flow of peace through the mind. And as the peace flows through the mind, all of that which is unlike peace begins to kind of dissolve. It loosens its grip. So the story that's being told, the emotions around it, the energy around it, they begin to kind of dissolve and soften in the light of this flow of higher energy we're calling peace that is emanating from a depth of being. So again, the piece about listening for the coach is that if you've never explored your own depth of being, if you've never rested in that place where peace abides, where compassion abides, where love abides, where kindness abides, you can pick any quality of being in that way that you'd like. If you've never rested in the source of that within yourself, it will be difficult for you to listen to another person and evoke that same quality of awareness and being and experience in a coaching session. But that really is the work. As much as the story matters, as much as the psychological matters, as much as our presence matters, what really ultimately matters is a quality of being that we inhabit ourselves that evokes qualities of being in the people that we work with. And as I said, this is new for many, many people, not just to tap into that place within themselves where these qualities exist, but to actually begin to embody them as experiential realities, and then to experience what happens to the grip of, let's say, these old beliefs or old emotions or energies, what happens to the grip of those things in the light of the expansive beingness that they are becoming and are being with you in that coaching session. This is the ultimate depth of listening. In other words, it doesn't get deeper than this. This is soulful work. This brings our soul into connection with the soul of another person, you could say. There's a dance of souls that happens. It's kind of a sacred ground that we explore within ourselves first, and that we extend as an offering to someone else to explore with us in a coaching or other context. We want to extend that offering not just through words, but through the very quality of our being that shows up as that which we choose to be, as that which we declare is our way to be in this world, that which we truly are. So I hope this was helpful, because I realize for some of you this may be new. But if you've liked this video, do subscribe or like it. We can then bring more of this work to the world, and come back as I continue to explore these ideas, because videos do overlap in the sense I do talk about subjects in different ways at different times. And the more that you kind of hear it in different ways, it can become more meaningful for you. And if it's more meaningful for you, you're much more likely to go out in the world and put it into some kind of practice in a way that works in your life and works for those that you may be working with as well. Always, your comments are welcome below, and thank you for joining us, and see you in the next video.